Drew here, and I actually feel like it's really nice to have City on a Hill back for a second season. The opening episode, episode 1 of season 2, Bill Russell's Bedsheets. The thing with this show is that it's very much the prototypical Showtime show in a lot of ways. It has a good cast, it has a certain level of effort put into it that you would expect from Showtime. The writing is strong. They keep the plot moving at a pretty brisk pace, which is not very, very typical of the show that this, kind of is very, very reminiscent of, which is The Wire, obviously. But if there's a flaw in it, I think it's that it's a little bit visually monotonous. Like, there's not a whole lot going on in Boston that doesn't look like every other part of Boston. And it's not as flavorful as the show I previously mentioned, The Wire. But on the whole, I feel like its strengths were pretty apparent in the season premiere directed by Kevin Bacon. And to his credit, this is, the trend is that you have a lot of actors on their shows directing an episode or two. And I would never have known it was him directing if I hadn't seen his name in the credits as being the one directing. I think to a certain extent, these shows are so proficient, the people behind the scenes are so adept at their jobs, that they make it relatively easy for people to just step in and direct the episode. But to his credit, I don't think that he overplayed his character this episode. Obviously, he is one of the two leads, the nominal lead, I would say, of this show. And to a certain extent, that means he's going to get a lot of screen time. But I didn't feel like he played, I don't think he overplayed himself. I think that he did a nice job of giving other characters moments to shine. And there are a lot of new characters in this premiere being introduced. This is kind of a soft reboot. There's still some glimpses of characters from last season. And to me, this is actually not a strength. I think that characters like Jimmy, they don't really have much of a place in the narrative at this point, given that their main significance was to the plot line of last season. And I feel like, maybe they will justify these characters' inclusion as this season goes on. But at the moment, I'm kind of wondering if they're just kind of hanging on because of relationships that the show had with the actors. So this is one of those few things that I question at this point. I won't go so far as to say it's a flaw until the season is over, but I definitely feel that there's some characters that are in the peripheral for the most part that I think could have just been omitted from this season entirely. Things that stood out to me in this opening episode, just the insane amount of detail in this show. I remember, I was constantly defending recently the show Your Honor, which I really enjoyed. I thought that it was a very propulsive show, also on Showtime, but people kept complaining constantly that it wasn't very good at getting the details about crime and criminology right, and that, you kind of had to really, really suspend disbelief often. And this show, that is not something where I would have to make allowance for that, because this show, there's just so much specificity to the details that they include. They spend so much time just establishing how the bureaucracy works and how the relationships between different agencies and different individuals break down. And it's pretty interesting stuff. I feel that it does a good job of showing what it would actually be like to try and pursue justice within this system. And also, I think it has a unique perspective showing this character of DeCourcy, who I think, if you consider Jackie Rohr to be the show's nominal, stereotypical white male anti-hero lead, then this character is the dawning of a new era, this black man who is trying to figure out what he wants to do when it comes to pursuing justice, because he's in this tough position where he has to figure out how to make sure that the system doesn't abuse people who don't deserve it, how he can stand up for people in the community who are, having their rights neglected or trampled on, but also how he can pursue justice for those who deserve to have the book thrown at them, and what that means, even when it's a situation where he might be able to sympathize, and knowing that a lot of people in his own community despise him for what he's doing. So it's an interesting thing to explore, and this episode starts right off with him being called some racial epithets by a young man who he manages to get off, but he's not doing it completely out of the goodness of his heart. He's at kind of on the outs with the people in law enforcement after last season, where he gave immunity to an admitted murderer. So he's kind of doing a lot of things just to rankle his boss and other people within his department. I think it's an interesting place to start the season for this character, just to see the frustration boiling up in him. And last season he came in kind of a naive character, someone who didn't exactly know how everything was going to work within the justice system in the city. Obviously he knew some of what to suspect, but there's, a limit to that. But what was interesting to see this season is he's just a lot more familiar with the ins and outs of things, and he is really, really more capable of navigating that. And to me, this episode, it really, really hit the ground running with both Jackie Rohr and Kierce's characters, and just never looked back. I had found myself constantly actually going back to rewatch scenes, because they get through the exposition so quickly, and it's really, really rich with detail. I said that, the show is not as flavorful as The Wire, for example, but I think it is still a very, very flavorful show. There's a lot of dialogue this episode that, if you were the type of person who liked to quote dialogue from shows, I'm really, really bad at this. I watch too much TV and I can never remember dialogue. But I feel like there is a lot of dialogue this episode that was pretty good dialogue, and I felt like, even though there weren't a lot of water cooler moments per se, I felt like this was a strong premiere in that this story was constantly moving, and it was constantly setting up pieces, setting up character dynamics, and setting up where the season is going to go. The episode, one of the moments I think that stood out from, just a narrative perspective, was the moment when Jackie dumped the woman he was snorting coke with, who's an assistant attorney general, off at the hospital and just drove away, leaving her there. I think that it's kind of refreshing how honest this show is about what a dirtbag Jackie is as a character. I question whether or not, we need this character in 2021 to a certain extent, because I feel like, Kevin Bacon plays him well, but this is not a new character. We've seen a lot of these, anti-hero types in other shows. And again, I do feel like there's a certain degree of specificity here that, makes him an interesting person to watch. The way that he gets developed, I feel like they spend a little bit too much time with his home life. I did think that the moment when he walked away from his daughter, who was trying to open up to him about, their situation, I thought that was an interesting moment. Clearly, Jackie is having this crisis where he's looking at a lot of his behavior and he's trying to figure out who he wants to be going forward. And I imagine some of this is the guilt from the man he killed at the end of last season. Some of it has to do with, I'm sure, his daughter, which is why he struggles to talk with her, because he knows that she has turned out this way in a large part due to his influence. And I thought it was really telling that the daughter could not remember that the mother used to sing to her, but she could remember playing cowboys and Indians with her father in this dollhouse. So the influence that he has had on her was clearly far greater than the influence the mother has had on her. And I think that this is causing him to reevaluate a lot of things. And it's going to be interesting as Kierce sniffs out the fact that he dropped off this woman in a state where she can no longer talk at the hospital, and then just drove away. And it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. I also think that his relationship with this new character, the new U.S. attorney that he has to work with, who tells him she will have to make his life hell if he doesn't quit, Karen Shimizu. I think that this is an interesting dynamic, and it's going to be interesting to see this play out. It's a little bit reminiscent of the start of his relationship with DeCourcy in some ways, where you've got someone coming in who thinks that they know how to handle the system, and they think that they can get by without greasing the wheels and dealing with people like DeCourcy. Well, not DeCourcy, with people like Jackie Rohr. And it's going to be interesting to see how this relationship breaks down over the course of the season, and if she learns to grudgingly work with him. If this episode had an oh shoot moment, it was obviously the moment where they established that these two young men that were involved in this shooting that led to the death of an innocent young girl. In a gut-wrenching moment for me personally, I felt like the scene, it was interesting. I'm not sure if it was just that they didn't get all the footage that they needed in the editing bay and that the scene felt rushed for that reason, or if they purposefully just tried to rush through the build-up to focus on the impact of the aftermath. I'm not sure which it was, but at any rate, it felt a little bit rushed at the beginning. But the scene where, they are going out and they're shooting at a car that's driving away, and then there's this realization that some stray fire has killed a young girl, and the reaction of the parents as they're taking her body away, it was just like I said, gut-wrenching. Hearing them say, no, just leave her with us a little bit longer. I felt like this scene was just, hard to watch as a parent, realizing the grief and the pain that they would be going through. And I think it's important that they do show the victims, because I think sometimes it can be easy to make justifications for people and the decisions that they make. And in fairness, people are in hard positions, but I feel like it's important to focus on the consequences, not just to the individuals when society tries to figure out what justice means for them, but also on the people that they have hurt. And I feel like this show is trying to find this tricky balance. I feel like it's interesting. I wonder how many people this show, pleases with its depictions, because I feel like oftentimes nuance goes unappreciated, but I appreciated it for sure. But I think that, I got a little distracted there, but I had to kind of give some of the setup. I thought that the revelation that Kelvin and Anton, the two young men involved, are the sons of Grace Campbell, who is this woman who had a marvelous introduction scene in this episode where she uses her power to keep someone at the bank from, evicting this woman, claiming that she's defaulting because she needs 2 weeks to come up with the funding to pay off the money that she owes. And to me, this character, she was introduced in that way, and I didn't pick up on this. And the moment where they cut out from the table and you realize that they're her sons, I was like, oh man, really, really taken aback. Even though it's kind of, one of those twists that you could kind of see coming if you were looking for it, I feel, but I wasn't really looking for it. So to me, that was an interesting wrinkle, and it's going to be interesting to see how that impacts the story for the rest of the season. I think that it was also, unique this episode to see the dynamic between DeCourcy and Jackie and how it's really broken down and how they're kind of, at this point, kind of in the frenemy zone. I feel like, there's a level at which you kind of wonder how much someone like DeCourcy ever could get along with someone like Jackie. But I do like the moments when these characters butt heads. I think it's the most compelling part of the show in many ways. I think that the friction between these characters is really what gives the show a lot of its momentum. So I think that this was a really good premiere. Like I said, there weren't a ton of water cooler moments per se, but that's not really what this show is about. It's just a really good, gritty, well-realized period thriller. I mean, I guess technically the 90s are a period setting now. So I thought it was a good table setter. I think the show has, if anything, gotten better from last season. So I'm really, really excited to see where it goes over the course of this season. But those are just my thoughts for what they are worth. Let me know what you thought in the comments. If you're interested in seeing my upcoming reviews of other shows, I haven't yet decided whether I'm going to keep reviewing this on a weekly basis, but if there's a ton of interest, I will. So show a ton of interest. But if you're interested in seeing my reviews of this and other upcoming shows, please consider subscribing. And as always, thank you for watching.